Hello and welcome. Today, we're going to try to untangle a really confusing legal knot that affects so many Filipinos in international marriages. We're talking about a very specific and honestly fascinating part of Philippine law, Article 26 of the Family Code. So let's get right into it.
It really sounds like a riddle, doesn't it? But, for a lot of Filipinos, this isn't some hypothetical question. It's a very real and very confusing legal reality. I mean, how can a person be legally single in one country, but still technically married in another to the exact same person who just divorced them? This paradox, this is at the absolute heart of what we're exploring today. So here's how this bizarre legal trap actually works. Picture this: a Filipino is married to a foreigner. The foreign spouse goes back to their home country, let's say the US or Germany, and gets a divorce. Easy enough. For them, the marriage is done, they're single, they're free to move on, free to remarry. But for the Filipino spouse, back in the Philippines, it's a completely different story. The law there didn't automatically recognize that foreign divorce. So they were just stuck, divorced in the eyes of the world, but legally bound to a marriage that, for all intents and purposes, didn't exist anymore.
Yeah, this created a really unfair situation. It was totally one-sided. The law was basically holding the Filipino spouse hostage in a marriage that only existed on a piece of paper in the Philippines. And that kind of situation, well, it was practically screaming for a legal solution.
This exact problem came to a head in a famous case called Vandorn versus Remilo. Get this. A Filipina was divorced by her American husband in the US. She moves back to the Philippines, works hard, builds a successful business. Years later, her American ex-husband shows up in the Philippines and tries to claim a piece of her business assets. His argument? That under Philippine law, they were still married. I mean, that case just perfectly laid bare how unjust the whole thing was.
Okay, so to understand how this got fixed, we first have to look at the general rule for marriages that happen outside the Philippines. Now, the starting principle has this fancy Latin name, lex loci celebratonis. But don't worry, it just means the law of the place of celebration. All it says is that generally, if a marriage is considered valid where it happened, say you got married in Las Vegas, then the Philippines recognizes it as a valid marriage too. And this respect for foreign marriages is exactly what set the stage for all the confusion when a foreign divorce got thrown into the mix. And this brings us to the big one. The specific legal fix, the exception that was created to solve this whole one-sided marriage problem. And here it is, the solution, the second paragraph of Article 26. This was written specifically to fix the kind of injustice we saw in the Von Dorn case. Basically, it says that if a foreign spouse gets a divorce in another country and that divorce allows them to remarry, then guess what? The Filipino spouse is also given the right to remarry under Philippine law. Finally, it leveled the playing field. Let's just break that down into 4 simple steps. 1, you need a valid marriage between a Filipino and a foreigner. 2, the foreign spouse, and this is key, has to be the one who gets the divorce abroad. 3, that divorce has to be legit, allowing the foreigner to marry someone else. And if all of those things are true, then step 4 kicks in. The Filipino spouse is also finally free to move on and remarry. But how does a law like this actually work when it's put to the test in a real courtroom? Well, there's a pretty fascinating case that shows just how powerful this legal provision can be. Let's talk about the case of Imelda Pilapil, a Filipina, and her German husband, Eric Gehling. Their story is wild, and it really shows the massive impact of Article 26. Okay, so check out this timeline. They get married, they separate. Then, in January of '86, the German husband gets a divorce finalized in Germany. Now, here's the crucial part. After the divorce is final, he then tries to sue his now ex-wife for adultery in the Philippines, based on things that allegedly happened years earlier while they were separated. So that brings us to the big legal question. Even though the alleged adultery happened when the marriage was technically still a thing, did he, as a now divorced foreigner, still have any right to show up in a Philippine court and claim to be the offended spouse in an adultery case? The Supreme Court came back with a crystal clear answer. Nope. No way. Their logic was simple. The second that divorce became final in Germany, he was no longer Imelda Pilapil's husband. And in the Philippines, only the offended spouse can file an adultery case. Since he wasn't a spouse anymore, he had no legal standing. The foreign divorce literally severed his ability to sue her under Philippine law. Pretty powerful stuff. But wait, there's a really critical twist here. The law seems pretty clear, right? But a later Supreme Court case added a very, very important clarification about who exactly has to be the one to file for that divorce. So, in a later case called Orbicido, the Supreme Court revealed a major limitation. They clarified that this whole fix under Article 26 is available only when the divorce is filed by the foreign spouse. If the Filipino spouse is the one who files for it, or if they file for it together, this rule doesn't apply. The court's thinking was that the law was meant to be a shield to protect an abandoned Filipino spouse, not a sword for them to start the divorce process. And as you can probably guess, this interpretation has gotten some serious criticism. A lot of legal experts say it's still just not fair. I mean, why should a Filipino who needs to get out of a broken marriage have to just sit and wait for their foreign partner to be the one to act? It puts them right back in that legal limbo. As one legal commentary puts it, it creates a situation that just doesn't match up with reality, a gap that many people think can only be fixed with a whole new law. So as we start to wrap this up, you can see it all really boils down to a fundamental question of what's fair and how a country's laws can or can't keep up with global realities. So what's the big takeaway here? Article 26 was, without a doubt, a landmark law. It was a direct, necessary answer to a real injustice. But as we've seen the courts apply it over the years, it also shines a spotlight on this much deeper challenge. How do you make your own country's laws work fairly in a world that's so interconnected, where people and marriages and legal systems are crossing borders all day, every day? And that leaves us with this final question to think about. If the whole point of this law was to create fairness, does the way it's interpreted now, where the Filipino spouse has to be the one who's divorced by the foreigner, truly accomplish that goal? It's a question that really gets at the heart of law, justice, and the way the modern family is changing. Thanks for joining me for this explainer.